So, what's trending? Bridging your Catholic faith with your everyday life. You're listening to Trending with Timmerie on Relevant Radio.
Welcome to our weekly marriage hour here on Trending. Joining me in just a moment will be the celebrity and royal matchmaker you know and love here on Trending. She's here. She matchmakes royals, celebrities, but also us peasants as well. So if you are single, pringle, and ready to mingle, she is a person to speak to. If you have a question today, the number is 1-888-914-9149. You can also always ask your question on Instagram. Follow me at Timmerie. That's Timmerie. Today, during our marriage hour, we're going to dive into the topic of the impact on men when they're not the primary breadwinner. There seems to be a trend of late bloomers when it comes to men, and some challenges that people are experiencing surrounding interpersonal relationships and marriages, or even just men with the mindset that they are not the primary breadwinner. We'll talk about that in just a little bit here on the show. We're also going to answer some questions coming in about in-laws. Lots of questions about this recently. We did a show, part of the show on it last week, but I wanted to answer some of those questions. We're also going to dive into the impact that not communicating within your marriage can have. And good Catholic-oriented marriages, a lack of communications, keeping things from within and not sharing with each other. I'm not just talking about secrets, but things maybe you just allow to fester and build up for a long period of time, how that's actually leading to, quote, divorce, even within the context of good marriages who want better. We're also going to talk fascinating. I'm absolutely fascinated. I have a confession to make. I'm actually following Playboy Bunny on Instagram, but it's a former Playboy Bunny. In case you were wondering, Crystal Hefner, who was the spouse of Hugh Hefner, the founder of Playboy Bunnies, so I just followed her today because fascinating story came out, and I'm not following her because I love her content, but I'm curious as to where the direction will go with this. She has full on embraced, in her words, modesty. And she's working on staying true to herself. She's deleted all her old images and photos from her social media accounts. She's removed all of the plastic, all the fake within her body. And she's presenting herself as just her. She's embracing more of a natural look, natural lifestyle. Am I saying and endorsing her social media? Absolutely not. But you can see the long way she's come. And it's really, really neat to see. So we'll talk about that a little bit here on Trending. You're listening to Trending with Timmerie. Joining me now is celebrity and royal matchmaker Cristina Pineda from Matchmakers in the City. Welcome to Trending, Cristina.
So good to be with you, Timmerie.
Let's talk about this trend you're seeing among your married clients who you coach of the impact where a lack of communication, even whether it's faithful Catholics or non-faithful Catholics, are really struggling, and it's leading to divorce.
Right. I've had, especially in the past few months, I've been working with a lot of men and women who are married, and they have been telling me how they may have just had really great marriages in the past, but then other things seem to get in the way of their communication. Maybe they were very open to life, which is incredible, but they let the children be the top priority, and they put their marriage underneath that. And maybe they've started keeping things to themselves and started thinking, I don't have time to talk about this with my husband or with my wife, so I'll keep it inside. And that ends up growing and growing and growing inside until it gets to a pitch. Unfortunately, it has caused some people to even file for divorce, but it doesn't have to get there. Let's look at the big issue here, and that is spouses keeping things from each other. And I call that spiritual contraception. This is something that having those open lines of communication is so huge in keeping the integrity of your marriage, even if what you have to say is unpleasant or something that you know the other person isn't going to want to hear, but it is the courageous thing to do for your marriage. You might not even know why you feel a certain way, but it's important to be able to share that and grow together through those uncomfortable times. Okay, so you might think, okay, communication is important. I got it, but I don't have time. I have a story of a bachelorette who I was working with who she was dating an attorney, and every time they had a disagreement, she felt like he would be trying to convince a jury that he was right, and she felt like she was being convicted. And she said he was an amazing attorney. He was very high earning, and they're not together anymore, but now he has a pool in his backyard. So he was great at his job, but that way of communicating was not good for the relationship, and it ended. What I recommend instead is to have a monthly or weekly check-in with your spouse where you can bring up these things, and I can detail how to do that in a little bit. Timmerie, if you had any thoughts you wanted to add in to what I'm saying, and then I can
You're
go
making
through
some
those details.
I think that this is a really great example what you're talking about, that it's easy, not just the idea of hiding something from a spouse, but where you just don't communicate about something. You know, it might be something that's really simple that's bothering you, or it could be a big deal and you just can't find the words. Or I know sometimes for men, men kind of just think, well, it's not that big of a deal. I can endure this. It's fine. And then months, years, maybe even decades go by, and it's been there all this time, never resolved or never brought to the surface. And on one end, you know, someone could think, well, you'd assume the other person would get that it's a problem, but not necessarily. Sometimes we can be the worst at noticing our own behaviors and faults or problems. And so I think that there are a lot of really practical, simple things that can be done. And I know you have some practical tips as well. And one of my favorite things that our guest, Jim O'Day, the Executive Director of Integrity Restored, shared with us some months ago, a challenge for marriages. And that is at the end of each day as a couple to sit down and share your low point and high point for the day and just listen. Don't try to critique it. Don't try to fix it. Just listen. And it's a means to help couples start communicating, sharing what's going on in their lives so that there's an awareness and a collaboration between one another. And they do feel, I hate these words, but I'll use them, like there's a safe space to say what they need to say without being jumped on. And I think that that is one really, really good and helpful tip, that when Jim recommended it back in September for a marriage challenge for 1 month, my husband and I are still doing it, 4 months later, and I love it.
I love that too. And if possible, eating dinner together every night is really good to continue those open lines of communication. If that's not possible, that's what I was saying about the monthly or weekly check-in. And even if you do eat dinner every night together, it's a good thing to add on. The weekly check-in, I would say, would be if you're in a rough patch, because in this, you're going to want to bring up any issues because you don't want negativity to be every single night. So I recommend writing down things that you want to bring up in this safe place, quote unquote, where the kids are asleep, you've already eaten or are eating dinner, you're sitting down, you're looking into each other's eyes, you could be holding hands if you want, you could even light candles, and you can
I
make it
always laugh at that
relaxing.
moment when therapists always say it, sit facing each other, hold each other's hands. It's a lot of work just to get to that point.
It's so true. This is ideal, people, but it's good. If you can do this, that's already, wow, you guys are doing a great job. So if you can actually take time to hold hands, wow, that's great. So you can pat yourself on the back for that. But we want this to be relaxing. You can even add music. The bachelorette who I was mentioning said she would want to put on Spotify coffee house music to try to change the courtroom vibe when she was getting to fights with this ex-boyfriend. But you want to make it soulful, heart to heart, rather than a court of law. And then when you have that just more relaxing environment, you can bring up those sensitive topics. It could be something about your in-laws. It could be something about the way you're raising your children, issues that are important, so that you deal with the issues head on rather than letting them build up and then get to the point of really wreaking havoc with the relationship and having a divorce. Other things to keep in mind Don't have these conversations in the car, while you're driving, while you're distracted, while you're changing diapers, in front of your kids. I know how hard it is. I know how busy we all are. And sometimes that feels like the only time you can communicate something. But something I learned from a priest was this: you married this man, and you married this woman. Don't you want to give them that time to be able to speak with you? Isn't that one of the most important things that you can give that person, to have time rather than get angry and have to
Be
say things really
rushed.
quickly?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I do think that's interesting. You mentioned, being careful not to necessarily always talk about these things in front of kids, which is so important, not laying, adult burdens on children, or while you're rushing from one thing to the next. I do think that sometimes a car can be a great time, though, because sometimes it's a time where you have a long stretch of time together, depending on whether or not the kids are there, if it's an appropriate conversation. But I say that too because I know for men it's so important to have something to do while they're talking. Men don't like to just sit face to face and have conversations the same way we do. Men, it's still important that you do that, but sometimes it's helpful for him to not have to be face to face, but to be able to work on something and not feel so confronted, but working through something and more of a relaxed posture as well, rather than head on. That can almost be rather confrontational at times. So you kind of get why people's hackles go up in those situations. I want to mention something, as we're talking about communication, Christina, which is so important. Many people aren't sharing simple things that are upsetting them, from how the day's going, day-to-day struggles, to bigger things that can become problems if left unresolved. My I would say mode of operation when it comes to communicating is almost to over communicate with my spouse, and maybe you're one of those. I think women probably have a higher tendency to over communicate, which can mean that maybe it sounds like you're complaining a lot or nitpicking. It's almost as if you're constantly talking out loud, but you're talking out loud to your spouse. Now, that isn't necessarily bad unless you haven't learned tactfulness. And that is if you're not sensitive to their feelings as well, how what you say may land on them. They may always think that you're complaining or nagging at them, but you might just be thinking out loud in a way that could come off that way. And so I think that with communicating more, learning that tact is so important. How could this fall on my spouse's ears? How could I say this in a kinder way, especially maybe if I'm talking about some issue that I'm having with him or with someone he's close to, with a family member, perhaps. I think all of these are reminders that we have to ponder not what we're just shooting out at the other person to work on, but what we're turning in and seeing that we ourselves need to work on. I mean, Jesus Christ himself talks about the log that can be within our own eyes as we're trying to pull the speck out of another person's. And I think this applies especially within the context of marriage. But Christina, I would argue that when you are sharing more, when you're having these regular opportunities for conversation, nightly dinner, having those regular opportunities, and maybe it's breakfast, those opportunities to share your high point and low point, that you start to see how you can work on things yourself, but also your spouse is able to see and help you identify areas where you can also grow, relax, or, make many adjustments that will truly help you. Your spouse has your best interest in mind. And when you're sharing and communicating like this, it's a game changer.
It is. You almost feel like that person becomes your diary in some ways, in a really good way, though, because that person you can just share so much with that person, and your love grows when you are able to, little by little. And maybe it's not like that right now for you, and that's okay. You can work up to that point. And something that you were saying, Timmerie, is that in this growth, it's also personal growth that we all are doing. That you may have heard, when you get married, you're getting a PhD on your spouse. And one of the ways that your classes is learning about their communication style, learning about what makes them tick, what upsets them. When you figure this out, and it takes years usually to really nail it down, and you're always learning more and more, and everyone is just so multi-layered, and there's so much mystery every day with even with someone you've been married to for years and years. But when you start to learn these things, that's how you can love that person better. And it's an intellectual thing too. It's like a PhD in the other person.
I keep thinking of the words of St. Paul in Ephesians chapter 4, where we see it quite a bit, and especially Ephesians 4 and 5, where St. Paul is talking about family life and the roles of husband and the roles of the wife. But when he's talking about how we have new life in living God's way, he says, put away falsehood, let everyone speak the truth with his neighbor, for we are members of one another. And then he goes on to say, be angry, but do not sin. Do not let sin go down on your anger, and give no opportunity to the devil. In other words, St. Paul's emphasizing that because we are people of faith, we should speak the truth and not be afraid. Grant, we don't always have to share the truth. We don't always have to, in other words, share too many words. Truth is important, but we don't always have to speak. But when we do speak, we should never share what is a lie. We should be willing to share and talk and communicate and collaborate with other people. But what's important that St. Paul says next is he comments about how, yes, you can be angry, but don't let your anger be sinful in terms of how you live it out. Don't give the devil an opportunity. And I think this is a really important phrase when it comes to marriage in particular, because sometimes we harbor resentment. We don't tell the truth. We're not totally forthcoming, or we just don't communicate at all. And the devil would love to drive a wedge between spouses, especially Christian spouses. We can't give him an inch, a centimeter, a quarter of a centimeter. We need to be willing to communicate and tell the truth and not give that opportunity away. And so I think that, some of these tips that we see that Christina's giving, from everything from having those nightly meals to, really taking the time to sit down face to face and not just rush through these important conversations, or sharing your high and low point each day together. My husband and I started doing this last year. We love it. We continue to do it. You're listening to Trending with Timmerie here on Relevant Radio. That's Cristina Pineda from matchmakersinthecity.com. We're going to come back talking about a Playboy bunny who's gone modest. Today's show is sponsored by Kolbe Academy. With more than 40 years of experience in Catholic home education, Kolbe Academy offers a blend of classical Catholic curriculum and the latest educational technology. More info at relevantradio.com/Kolbe.
Bridging your Catholic faith with your everyday life. You're listening to Trending with Timmerie on Relevant Radio and the Relevant Radio app.
Welcome back to Trending. Cristina Pineda, the celebrity and royal matchmaker, is joining us. We're going to come back answering some questions that have come in about in-law relationships. We did a great segment on that last week. Do you know there's a whole Bible a whole Bible book that shares about in-law relationships? We're also going to talk about the impact on men when they're not the primary breadwinner. In other words, sometimes when their wives make more than them. Joining me now, though, as I mentioned, is Cristina Pineda, celebrity and royal matchmaker, matchmaking us peasants as well. I want to talk about the former Playboy bunny who I am following on social media, but she's gone modest. Now, I'm not in any way endorsing her account at all. What I'm saying is this is a fascinating story, Cristina. Former playmate Crystal Hefner, who was the wife of Hugh Hefner himself, the founder of Playboy and all of that, is now in a state of embracing modesty. She has gotten rid of everything plastic inside of her, and a lot of her images on social media now, again, not all perfect, are very refined, and some of her outfits are full-on gorgeously modest, incredible fashion. Others, so-so, but from where she was to where she is today, it's fascinating to see. She married Hugh Hefner in 2012 at age 24. There was over a 60-year age gap between the two of them. And she actually once called the marriage off before she eventually did end up marrying him. Now, as you know, Hugh Hefner died about 5 years ago, back in 2017. Wow, where's the time gone? And since then, she's been working on remaking herself. And much of that has included her new embrace of modesty. She said, "Modesty is what empowers me." And she's talking about how she's removed, as I mentioned before, everything that's fake from her body. She's deleted all of her old photos. Fascinatingly, Christina, she's seen a drop in her followers on social media because of this, but she feels extremely inspired to stay true to herself and inspire other people to stay true to themselves as well and not necessarily have to show as much skin.
It's true. And she has noticed more female followers actually from women who want to follow what she's doing. So I think she may be shedding a few, but she'll get more. I guess something that I wanted to focus on with this story is that so many women feel the pressure to look a certain way and conform to this unrealistic and fake image of beauty, of what beauty is, in order to be loved. They feel that they need to look like this in order to be loved. And they may resort to plastic surgery to make this dream a reality. As Crystal has shown, plastic surgery can have toxic effects. And something else that you can find on her Instagram that I was looking at is that she reveals her struggles with the toxicity of the implants that she had. It's breast implant illness. And there were a lot of side effects, terrible side effects that came with that. So even though she had everything removed, she still has to deal with some of the side effects. So just for the female listeners, I just want you to know that these things are really problematic, not just for your spirit, but also for your body.
Yeah.
And if a man is only attracted to you as a result of you getting something fake done to your body or looking a certain way because you've had these fake additions to your body, he's not the right one for you. Just as with men, if the only reason she's attracted to you is because of your flashy car or the money that you make, she's not the right one for you.
Come on, Christina, we all know it's for the legs. I'll never forget some years ago when it was a chastity speaker. Oh my gosh, his name totally just dropped from my mind. You know who I'm talking about, the chastity speaker. Jason Everett, thank you. Yes, totally went blank there. Jason Everett was giving a talk about how when he walked into the men's restroom, there was above the bathroom mirrors this image of a bunch of women's legs, just their legs lined up in a row. And he thought, I really wonder if I were to go into the women's restroom, if I would see the same thing, a bunch of hairy male legs all lined up in a row. So that's where I got he just likes him for his legs. But what you're saying is so important. And kind of a side note, the fact that Crystal Hefner is saying she had everything plastic removed from her body and she is going through some major health issues as a result of that. I actually know people who've gone through exactly what she has, and along with a number of other side effects. People don't talk about this, but from the implants that women end up having put in, they actually get black mold because inside their body because the implants leak. And it's absolutely horrific, and it impacts their health for years to come. To have black mold in your body for quite a while, even if you have it removed at some point, it does a tremendous amount of damage to the body. And so hearing some of her story and following along, I think a lot of women, Christina, are riveted by this woman who, in the eyes of money, had it all. She was someone who clearly came from rags to riches type of experience. And then here she is after the death of Hugh Hefner, turning her life around to see, you know what? I was in not a great place and I'm in a much better place. I do see she compliments Hugh Hefner quite a bit still. I'm sure I don't even want to get into the relationship itself. I just can't get my mind or anything to go there. But to see where she's going now in this change, it did make me think of something else, though, Christina. And I think this is a problem on social media today, where more needs to be approached in our own lives. We can't just delete a bunch of images on social media and recreate ourselves overnight. And I think that's one thing that does concern me about Crystal Hefner's story. Although I'm so excited to hear that Modesty is empowering her and she's valuing herself, I do think that it's easy for a lot of young people today to all of a sudden just delete everything on their social media account and think that that will automatically remake them, as if the images are no longer out there, as if, everyone right away is going to understand, well, this is the new me. The problem is that if we've had a mode of operation with friends, family members, and we suddenly try to be someone else, well, they may try to pull us down. They may not understand. They may be confused. And all of this can have a difficult impact on us as we're trying to change. So just changing a social media profile, deleting the old and putting on great new ones, doesn't necessarily solve the problem. And I'll argue, and I can't really think of another word for this, but it can still, well, I can, I'll scale it back here. You're still very attention seeking. I was going to refer to it attention seeking, but I won't here. But here's the reality. We can still seek attention even if we're changing the type of attention we're looking for. And so I think that's kind of in the back of my head when I'm following this Crystal Hefner story.
Right. And I think it's a step in the right direction, because I think she's learned after years of flaunting her body to the public and having it all, as you said, that it's really empty, and she felt overexposed. And she's trying on this new dressing modestly thing and posting more modest photos. And I do think, though, for any women listening you may think, I have a few photos on there that aren't really just how I want to portray myself and how I don't feel comfortable with those photos being up there now that I've grown a little closer in my relationship with the Lord. I think it's a good thing to take those down. And you might not agree with us. You might not feel like, oh yeah, you know what? I like, my body's never been better. I want to show the world. You might think that, but there's something in your heart that's saying, I don't know. I'm asking you to try to test this out and see how taking down those photos, if that helps you, or if you feel like you'd rather keep doing the things you're doing. But I think it's going to help you. I know I definitely went through a cleansing period on my social media because, I didn't realize some of the things that I was posting. And it was a process. I feel like I've learned so much more about what modesty means throughout the years. But I think it is a good step for any woman to try and see how it goes.
I'm thinking even of transitions in different points in our life where maybe something wasn't blatantly inappropriate, but you're in a different phase in life and you realize a change needs to be made. I remember my sister and I were talking about this not too long ago, and she was sharing, I really think I need to have a different wardrobe now. I'm a mom. I move like a mom. I don't move the same way. My body's changed. And so I really need to change the types of clothes I'm wearing, going kind of from an almost adolescent type of approach that maybe didn't move and jump on the floor in the same way that I do today. And even if that's just the significance of understanding how modesty actually does change a little bit given our state in life. I remember when I graduated from college, I knew right when I was about to graduate that I, one, needed clothes in general, but two, I needed clothes that were more professional, more mature. And I had to go through and clean up my wardrobe. Well, we have phases in our lives such as these. And coming back for just a second though, Christina, because I do want to touch on this, whether it's Crystal Hefner or anyone who feels like they need to remake themselves, don't try to do it through social media. Great. If you want to have a social media account, that's fantastic. Maybe it's a good idea to not have social media for a time. But I think that it's important to recognize that, especially as people of faith, we need to understand that therapy, prayer, God's timing, God's mercy, God's healing, and giving things time can be extremely important when it comes to allowing ourselves to go through that healing journey and to actually go through that transformation that is very important.
Right. And that's not just a matter of what photos you post, because we want to make sure that the attention that we're seeking is the Lord's attention. We're not trying to get more likes or these. Yeah, it's such a trap to get into. So before you post anything, think about, okay, what am I trying to accomplish with this photo? And maybe it is taking time away from social media if you feel that you are if you're honest and you say, okay, yeah, even though it's I'm more conservatively dressed, I do want to get attention in certain ways. So we do want to make sure that we're doing things led by the Lord, and that we know how much He loves us and we are the apple of His eye, that we don't need to try to get attention from anyone else. And the man or woman who is right for you is going to be someone who appreciates you inside and out. I'm not saying that throw everything to the wind of caring for yourself. We want you to care for yourself. We want you to look great. But you want to know that the person will be attracted to you when you have the most attractive person is a woman or a man of virtue. That is the most attractive. I don't care what photos you have on Instagram. You want people are drawn to people who have that virtue inside. So when you spend time cultivating those interior qualities and that interior castle that St. Teresa of Avila talked about, that is so attractive. And you will find that this is the fastest way to meet your future husband or future wife.
And I think that remembering the words of St. Paul, where he reminds us that in Christ we are a new creation. The old has passed away. Behold, the new is here. And embracing those words, even if, people knew us when maybe we lived a more sinful life, when we were dressing in a different way, a future is always possible in Christ. He renews us. He restores. Yes, there may be fallout from the mistakes we've made, but that wholeness, that purity, it is always available to everyone. And whether your daughter needs to hear this, whether you need to hear this, it's so important that we say that. And no matter what state in life we are in, I think especially as women, there are a few questions I think we should really regularly ask ourselves. And who would have thought that talking about the last wife of Hugh Hefner and former Playboy bunny Crystal Hefner's inspiration of modesty in her own life would lead us to ask these? But do we ask ourselves questions such as, what does modesty mean to us? How do you communicate modesty? And does modesty really matter? I think those three questions are really important. What does modesty mean to you? How do you communicate it? And does modesty matter? Because these will help us to kind of reevaluate how we stand, what we talk about, what we post on social media, what clothes we wear. Remember, modesty doesn't just have to do with what we wear. It has to do with how we carry ourselves, what we say, not sharing too much, sharing the right things in the right timing. And this, I think, helps people to understand that modesty isn't about judging other people's clothes. It's about the whole person, and it's for men and women. Cristina, any final thoughts on the story?
Yes, I just wanted to echo what you said, that redemption is possible for anyone. So I want any women, especially listening, to know that you may feel that you've gone too far, and it's too late, and it's not. Crystal is a playmate. You can come back. And also just to remember, whenever someone posts a revealing photo, whatever the intention is, it does send the message that that person wants attention, is willing to degrade him or herself for that attention. So whatever reason you're posting, just know that that is the message that's coming across. So I just was thinking about Britney Spears, who recently put some very revealing photos online, and it just shows that someone's just crying out for attention, and you don't want that to come across. You don't want your photos to come across like that. Those are my last words.
That's Cristina Pineda, celebrity and royal matchmaker here on Trending with Timmerie. Thank you so much for joining us, Cristina. You can find her work at matchmakersinthecity.com. I've also tagged her on Instagram, so be sure to go and check out her profile, learn more about her, all of her and her sister's incredible dating tips at matchmakersinthecity.com. I'll be right back. We're going to take some of your questions. Numbers 1-888-914-9149. We had a couple of questions come in about what if your wife is a primary breadwinner and the impact this has on men, as well as we'll discuss some in-law relationship questions here on Trending. I'll be right back. Programming brought to you by Solidarity Health Share. The new Solidarity One program offers expedited sharing of medical bills for even faster service, expanded senior discounts, pharmacy sharing, and greater flexibility to fit any healthcare budget. Learn more at CatholicHealthShare.com.
So, what's trending? Bridging your Catholic faith with your everyday life. You're listening to Trending with Timmerie on Relevant Radio and the Relevant Radio app.
Welcome back to our weekly marriage hour here on Trending. A number of questions have come in, everything from in-laws to what if your spouse is the primary, that is your female spouse, the primary breadwinner in the home. We're going to touch on these, but first I wanted to remind you that these coming weekends, this weekend and the following, many Walk for Life, Marches for Life are occurring across the nation. We have the National March for Life in Washington, D.C. coming up in a couple weeks. We also have the Walk for Life West Coast in San Francisco, One Life LA, major walks occurring in Austin, Texas, Minneapolis, and many walks in our local communities. So I want to encourage you, big or small, try to get out there because it's important to not only stand up for the unborn, be a public witness. That's extremely important. But sometimes we also need to be reminded that there are other people out there like us, and especially for young people, to see the youth and the liveliness of the pro-life movement. It will help inspire young people to be there, hear the stories and testimonies from the speakers. So I want to encourage you, get out and participate in these coming weeks, March and Walk for Lives that are occurring, marking the Supreme Court decision of Roe versus Wade, its anniversary on January 22nd. We'll share more about some of the events, and we'll also be live broadcasting from the March for Life on Friday, coming up in a couple weeks here. But I want to come back during our weekly marriage hour, and if you have a question you would like to take up, please always feel free to send it to me. The number's 1-888-914-9149, or you can comment live now on my Instagram or send me a message at Timmerie, that's Timmerie. Okay, so coming up, I want to take up an in-law question that keeps coming up here, but first, fascinating question that I wanted to touch on, and it's, I think, impacting many relationships for people, and it's a trend I've been noticing of late for many spouses. We've seen this among our peer group, and that is the impact that being a breadwinner or not has on male-female roles. I received a question recently about how not being the primary breadwinner impacts men, from security, confidence, you name it. And it really made me think about a lot of conversations that have been buzzing around in my demographic, millennials on down. And that is that we've noticed a trend in our peer groups that a lot of the men have been, what I would arguably say, late bloomers when it's come to their career. And I say late bloomers, just being late bloomers in general in terms of getting into their career, getting set and moving forward. But also if you compare apples to apples of the same age groups between men and women. And what this has led to in many instances is where the wife today in 2022 is often making more money than her husband. So the question has to do with, how does this impact a man? Do things need to change? And so I want to talk about a number of elements of this, because some might argue and say, well, hey, that's great if a woman's making a great salary. There shouldn't be any jealousy, or that shouldn't make a man feel insecure. Okay, on the surface level, you may say that, but I think that this is a legitimate conversation that we need to have. And it reminds me of a conversation we had a couple months ago, and that is, can or should men be stay-at-home dads? Now, that is one show that I have received a ton of comments on and intense responses, especially from women who have been through this and experienced it and shared about how negatively it impacted their marriage when their husband was a stay-at-home dad. And a lot of information was shared from women about how the husband, the father, not being the primary breadwinner had impacted their own marriages and their dynamic. And it's not just a matter of a man being insecure because his wife's making more than him. It actually goes much deeper than that. It doesn't just have to do with ego. Being a late bloomer is definitely impacting this. It doesn't have to do with just being lazy. It goes, again, much deeper. And it has to do with the fundamental dimension of the human person, specifically men, naturally being hunter-gatherers. I want to come to that in just a moment here, but let's think about this for a second. Is it odd that many men are late bloomers when it comes to their careers and work? Well, it's different from generations in the past. Even if you just look at literature written 100 years ago, there's a radically different story about the maturity level of both men and women in adolescence. And even if you look, we have monarchs who reigned in their teenage years. The Blessed Virgin Mary herself had a child at roughly the age of 13. We know stories of teenage boys who were taking on intense levels of responsibility in manual labor. It almost seems as if the culture of sewing, cooking, cleaning, and nurturing for a woman, and the culture of hunting, gathering, and protecting for men has led to a confusion with regard to how we relate to one another as male and female. You see, these things, as simple as it may be, such as what used to occur for everyone prior to even 60, 70 years ago, that is that the wife had to sew clothes for the family, cook, clean, really nourish, and was present in the home, even if she was doing all of this work. And where a man had to hunt, gather, and physically protect and defend his family from savage animals, people looking to steal things, an uncouth and uncivilized society at times. You see, I think these things helped all of us in understanding on a very profound level love and responsibility. Responsibility for ourselves, and I would argue responsibility for others. So what does this have to do with the whole question of male-female roles and the impact on men when they're not the primary breadwinner and perhaps when their spouse makes more than them? Well, I think this really comes back to this original understanding that it is ingrained in men's nature to be hunters and gatherers. And when this is removed from a part of who they are, it tends to be confusing. Now, I'm not saying that every man needs to go and chop down a house and build a Lincoln Log home. That's not what we're saying. What we're saying is that choices in terms of how we relate to one another interpersonally matter when it comes to the natural dimensions of hunter-gatherer for a man, nourishing for a woman. You see, it's a choice in today's culture when perhaps men choose to sit back and not dig in when it comes to working. But it's also a choice to take a sense of responsibility, have a great sense of respect and need for your family. You know, I keep thinking of a friend of mine where the wife makes more money than the husband. Now, she tends to subtly make condescending remarks that are both competitive as well as jabs about how she's making more than him. Now, she doesn't want him to make more than her, but she makes a big deal about it. In other words, she's almost competing with her spouse. And I see how it impacts him. I see how it's impacted her as well. In a sense, it's led to a detachment from her children because she sees a greater value for herself in the world away from home, and it's impacted her kids. But could we argue, well, okay, if the wife's making more, wouldn't it make sense so that the kids have at least one parent home more involved? Yes, I'm not saying that there's a picture-perfect world for everyone, but what I do want to talk about for a minute is the ideal and what men need. We tend to talk about this a lot from the perspective of women, and the church has always encouraged and upheld the importance of mothers especially being present to their children. And psychology today, even psychology that radical feminists cite now, recognize that a mom being home provide something that a father radically cannot provide and is so important, especially in those first 5 years or so of a child's life, but even going beyond that. So let's talk for just a moment about the importance of competition. I think one of the challenges within marriage when a wife is making more than her husband is that a husband doesn't want to compete with his wife. He's not going to. And so sometimes I think there's a level of shutting down. Men need competition, but they don't need it from their spouse on either side. Men are struggling because they do strive to provide, but they're also confused because the question being asked today is providing fundamentally, quote, just about money, or is it more than that? And am I egotistical for thinking that it's just about money? These are a lot of the questions I've been hearing with this new trend of wives making more than their husbands. So when we talk about providing, I think to pause for just a moment, we have to recognize that providing comes in many forms. Yes, today the foremost form of that is monetarily, because it's not as if all men are going out hunting and gathering, beating off the pestilent bugs from their crops, or literally bringing home the bacon, a dead squirrel, cutting off the furs, or whatever that may be. Or necessarily even building fires. Living in Southern California for years, not in the mountains, it was odd to no longer have to build fires. And then today, being in the Midwest, I would love to have a fireplace, but our house does not have a fireplace. I don't know how houses in this freezing weather don't have fireplaces, but I digress. So when we're talking about providing, it comes, yes, monetarily, but it also comes physically, spiritually, and emotionally. These are incredibly important things to understand, especially as a man, and we can't reduce any of them. You see, my take on this whole idea of are men meant to be the providers of their home? Yes. That's in line with nature and it's in line with what the church has taught. We're going to come to that in just a moment. Husbands should be the primary breadwinner. And here's part of the reason why. Because there should not be pressure on a wife or a mother to be pulled in all directions, which is what we are seeing sociologically across the world, that women, mothers, wives, they feel pulled in every direction. They're exhausted. They can't do it all. They were told that they could have it all, a family, a career, an education, but then now they find themselves completely depleted. Having aged parents while still raising their children who are in high school, trying to work full-time, trying to volunteer for various projects. All of these are so important, and yet this pressure to be the primary breadwinner, even if not necessarily by choice or by choice, is leaving women missing a fundamental gift they have to bring to society and to their children. We can't just reduce women to working machines, just like we can't reduce men to working machines. But men have a special responsibility in providing. It's a God-given role that men hold. And children need their parents, but especially their moms. I'm not downgrading the father's presence in the home, but part of providing is providing for the emotional environment for your children. And so, one of the important questions I think to ask, that all parents must ask, not just fathers, is that you're asking whether or not we're running in a deficit. Do your kids need more? Does mom need more? Does your relationship need more? Does mom working outside of the home too much? Is that impacting the family? Is perhaps me making less, she making more, or me being a stay-at-home dad and her out working, is that impacting the kids? Is that impacting what the needs are of my whole family? I think modern technology such as dishwashers to store-bought clothing, or even farmed food, fast food, buying food at a grocery store has really changed how we relate to one another, even contraception. All of this has changed how we think we should function in a marriage. But it didn't actually change how we're supposed to function in a marriage. Men and women relate in an ideal model of human flourishment in marriage and family when we honor and respect human nature. There is an apostolic exhortation, a letter by Bishop Olmsted from Arizona, and it's a fantastic, fantastic letter. It's called Complete My Joy. It's written to families, and there's a lot to be unpacked there. One of the things he focuses on for a chunk of the letter is the importance of being able to live on one income, of living more modestly so that the kids can have mom at home. And he talks about how this is the proper order in nature. But he at one point also speaks to men. And he says, you are the primary protector of your family. What does this mean? He says, it means you are the seawall against the storms that threaten from inside and outside. That's a really important statement. It means you are a seawall against the storms that threaten from inside and outside. That is, what we do within our own home can actually be a threat to our own family, to the individuals and the unit as a whole. He goes on then to say, while your wife's attention is more naturally focused on the relationships within and around the family, yours naturally is drawn to threats. When I talk about those threats have everything to do with, is what is necessary to provide for my family here? Are there physical, spiritual, emotional threats occurring within our own dynamic in the home or outside? There's nothing wrong. And so coming back to this question of the impact on men when their wife is the primary breadwinner, there's nothing wrong with you for desiring to provide, for desiring to give more to your family, for desiring to protect your wife's gifts within the home for the sake of the family, for the growth and development of new human beings who are some of the greatest contributions we can make to society. So I think this was a great question. Much more needs to be said on it and discussed. Thanks for joining us for our weekly marriage hour here on Trending. This is Timmerie from Trending with Timmerie. Have you ever followed any of the social media stories about people who have struggled with fertility, have gone through in vitro fertilization, and perhaps have conceived and have a surrogate carrying their child, but then maybe the baby's lost or they don't quite get what they expect when the baby's born? We're going to talk about some of these celebrity stories. We'll also discuss how to thrive working from home. Join me Friday at 6 p.m. Central on Relevant Radio or the Relevant Radio app.